Thank you very much. As mentioned, my name is Jeff Whitty. Can you all hear me okay? All right, and I work with Northwest Straits Commission down in Mount Vernon, Washington. I am the Kelp program manager there, and I wear several hats, one of which is the coordinator of the Puget Sound Kelp Conservation and Recovery Plan, also known as the Kelp Plan. How many of you have heard of the Kelp Plan or familiar with it? Okay, a good number of you, that's great. So today what I'm going to be doing is going over the Kelp Plan, kind of high-level overview of the Kelp Plan, touching on its goals, and kind of bringing you through where we've been going through this last 4.5 years since it was published, and then try to bring down some points to relate it to what we're talking about here today, largely restoration. So you've all heard about a lot about kelp, but I want to bring you down to kelp forests in the Puget Sound. Like throughout the Sailor Sea, Puget Sound kelp forests are a vital component to the local ecosystem and the local people, including many of the Northwest tribes. However, at least canopy kelp, so basically Puget Sound bull kelp, are declining and or have disappeared in certain regions, including central and southern Puget Sound. So it's really a time for the local people to get together, learn more about kelp, and improve our conservation and recovery efforts. And this is largely where the Kelp Plan comes into play. In 2017, NOAA allocated funds for the development of the Kelp Plan. And the Kelp Plan actually originated from rockfish, a need for rockfish. There was a rockfish recovery plan that NOAA published, and within it, they called out for more information about critical habitat for rockfish and to conserve the habitat. So basically, we're talking about largely about kelp forests. And this development of the Kelp Plan was a highly collaborative process. All the groups here, there's 40 plus groups here, they were all involved in some aspect of the Kelp Plan development. Very collaborative effort, really created a lot of buy-in to the Kelp Plan early on. From 2017 to 2019, they held several workshops, which a lot of these groups were involved in, which allowed input from each of our partners. And then in 2020, they published the Kelp Plan. So the ending product was a fairly cohesive plan combining not only conservation and recovery, which go hand in hand, but also research and policy and communication, which are all really needed to make this work as a plan. And the Kelp Plan itself contains a framework of research, policy, and communication-oriented goals and 65 actions. Not going to go through all the actions today, don't worry. But in addition to that, the Kelp Plan has other things. It does have 3 appendices, which are probably fairly useful for work like this. Appendix A is Kelp Knowledge Review through, I believe it was 2019 to 2020. There's been a lot done in the last few years, so an update would be great. Cultural importance of kelp for Pacific Northwest tribes, always important to include. And then also workshop notes from the different workshops for the development. And the other thing that Kelp Plan is a call to action. Since the Kelp Plan itself has really helped to motivate a lot of the work within Puget Sound. And within the last 3 or 4 years, it's been amazing the amount of new research projects, initiatives, strategies that have been popping up to really help advance the Kelp Plan actions. But we're now at a point, it's kind of like the critical threshold where there's so much work being done, which is super amazing. We really need to focus on coordination and communication to work together cohesively and efficiently. And so in 2023, we started to do this work. And what we're focusing on is just where we are with the Kelp Plan and its actions. We want to know who's doing what and what actions are being undertaken. And so we did this through a multi-step process. First, we created a Puget Sound Kelp Project Inventory, which is basically who's doing what with kelp in Puget Sound. We then also held a workshop with many of our partners to get their input on where we are with those actions. We scored those actions based on their efforts and progress. And then we also got input from our partners on lessons learned and next steps for the actions that they're involved in. And this was all combined in a 2023 status update. And I'm going to be talking about the status update a little bit, but just let you know, this came out in 2023. There has been additional effort since then, so just keep that in mind. So what I'm going to be talking about from here on out is the goals of the Kelp Plan to get you more familiar with it, but also I'll touch upon some of the information that came out within the status update. So 6 goals within Kelp Plan. These focus on understanding and reducing stressors, understanding ecosystem value or services of kelp forests, describing kelp distribution and trends, designating kelp protected areas, restoring kelp forest, and promoting awareness, engagement, and action. So for each of these goals, I'll go through them one by one. These slides are what you're going to see for each goal, and just to quickly explain what you are looking at. The first, the orange lettering, that is the goal itself. On the bottom, you get an example of one of the actions. These typically are going to be one of the actions that are a bit more advanced in the effort that's being undertaken. And then right in there in the middle, that's what's coming out of the status update. So that orange number you see there, that is a mean score for the actions that we scored within the workshop. And I'll come back to that. But just know that is a rough score. It is a fairly subjective score, but we just want to figure out roughly where are we with these actions. Next to it is a number of actions within a goal, specific goal, and then how many of those actions have been started. So here and actually, let me go into the goals, or excuse me, the scoring. This is a scoring ranking. So we have a score from 1 through 4, depending upon the amount of effort and the progress being made within those actions, and then summing them up to mean what is the overall goal score. So we have red, which is 1, which is basically nothing's being done. And then we got the green score 4. On the opposite end, this is the ideal score, and this is basically the action has been completed, or it's at a level where in time, which could be 10 years down the road, it will be completed, or to a sufficient level for some actions which just they're indefinite. They can't be ever completed. And so for a score of 2 and 3, which is in between, score 2, something's been done, but we're going to need a very large lift to get to a score of 4. And a score of 3 is a lot has been done, but we still need that final push. So starting off with goal 1, understanding and reducing kelp stressors. This is a very large goal, as you can see. It contains almost 1/3 of the actions in the entire Kelp Plan. It is very policy heavy, but also has a lot of research. Again, research and policy are very big components throughout the Kelp Plan, but especially here. That action 1.3, you can see, identify stressors, that's the research, and then use that information to inform management, that's the policy. Something you'll see, it's got a low score, it's almost a 2. This is actually pretty true for most goals. We are very early on in the Kelp Plan, so you don't expect much to be done so far. In the workshop, though, it was very clear. We are actually farther ahead than is expected. There is a lot of great advancement within the Kelp Plan, but again, we're still in the early stages. So an orange score, not unheard of, kind of expected, but we have done a lot of good research with stressors, and especially this last year or so, which isn't being reflected in that score. We're having a lot more research. You heard from Wendell. That's really going to help advance the score and the actions within these goals. Moving on to Kelp Plan Goal 2, understanding ecosystem values of kelp, or the services of kelp. Very small goal, only 5 actions and a low score almost of 2. Again, this does not mean nothing's being done. Some stuff has been done, and as you heard from Ann Schaefer, they're doing amazing work with the relationships between kelp and forage fish and salmon, and so that project alone is really helping to push along action 2.1.1, but we just need more. We need more other species involved, other species of kelp, but this one is really important and one I really want to highlight, because especially when we're talking about restoration, when we restore kelp forests, we're not just restoring the kelp forest, we're trying to restore the services as well. So it's really important to understand what those services are as we restore our forests. And then moving on to Kelp Plan Goal 3, describing kelp distribution trends. The orange turned to yellow, so we're making progress on here. We have a score of 3, meaning we have a fair bit more effort in this. And this is pretty, it's common sense to have monitoring come before other things. You want to know where the kelp is and how the kelp is doing before you can really act on it. So we've had a lot of effort from a lot of different groups, a lot of tribes, agencies, community groups, nonprofits have really helped to pull this data together. And then the floating kelp indicator, which you heard yesterday from Hillary about, has really pulled a lot of that data together for floating kelp. We have a pretty good information for floating kelp, but we have very little information for understory kelp. This is an area we really need to focus on, and groups like Reef Check and PSRF are doing really good work, especially over these last few years with monitoring this understory kelp. So hopefully in the next few years, we can start seeing trends and better understand what's happening down there. Moving on to Kelp Plan Goal 4, designating kelp protected areas. Another small goal, only 5 actions, score of 2. The one thing I want to say about this, and it's just more of a kind of put a thought in your head, is when you go to restore a site, what do you think of when restoring that site? And one of those areas or things to think about is protected areas. Do you target protected areas because they're already protected and hopefully they have some form of management of stressors? And or when you create a restoration site, can you and do you try and set up a protected area around that restoration site, again, to manage those stressors? Goal 5 is probably the one you all are familiar with and interested in, is restoration of kelp forest. This one, again, score of 2. This is pretty interesting, I think, because PSRF has done some amazing work with improving the techniques of restoration efforts, especially with bull kelp. But what you don't see in here is this restoration goal involves not only the improvements of techniques, but also funding and mitigation. And we have done very little work with mitigation in Puget Sound, so that's helping to anchor that score down. Kelp Plan Goal 6, promote awareness, engagement, and action. We're back to yellow. And this one's very exciting to me because this deals with communication sharing, information sharing, engaging with the public. So the higher score means that a lot of the projects that are being undertaken now are involving this in their projects, which is very much needed to make this work successful and to work together. So kind of in conclusion, I just hopefully have shown you that there's been a lot of effort out there and Kelp Plan partners continue to move the needle forward, implementing and or facilitating implementation of the Kelp Plan actions, and beyond. And before I go, I do want to highlight 3 different efforts that are definitely helping to do this. One is the Washington State Kelp and Eelgrass Health and Conservation Plan. This was a bill that was passed in 2022, which directs Washington DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, to develop a plan to conserve and restore at least 10,000 acres of kelp and eelgrass by 2040. And they are taking a very large chunk of the Kelp Plan and implementing it, or they will be. In 2024, this work identified their first 2 priority areas as they are currently working as in regional efforts, for which they are now developing plans for. In addition, Washington DNR is also pulling goals and strategies from both the Kelp Plan and eelgrass strategy to develop the marine vegetation implementation strategy, which will help support and direct funding for marine vegetation, conservation, and recovery efforts. And then lastly, I do want to do a shout out for the Kelp node, but I'm not going to take Margot's thunder because she's talking next. But I do want to say that they are doing amazing work with helping to bring Washington and BC together and get that transboundary communication and coordination. And these efforts, plus many others, including the Kelp Plan, are really striving to work together and interweave and coordinate much of the work in Washington and leverage and uplift each other's work to advance kelp and eelgrass conservation and recovery in the Salish Sea. So with that, I do want to do a big thank you to all the Kelp Plan partners. I also want to do a very big thank you to the Kelp Plan Coordination Advisory Committee, which I have not mentioned yet. This has been a big driving force for the Kelp Plan or guidance for the Kelp Plan. A couple of our members are here today, so I just want to thank you all. And I also want to thank our funders. And any questions?